You may well have heard that some supermarkets are experimenting with what are known as refill stations to try to cut down on plastic waste. Big hotel chains, some of them switching to refill-only bottles for shampoo and soap. We're wondering whether the refill culture could revive the planet. Welcome to Roundtable. Good to have you with us. I'm David Foster. Every single minute, one rubbish truck's worth of plastic is dumped into our oceans. Well, we've heard the scary facts about plastic all the time. So could refilling containers, rather than just binning them, be the answer?
We are losing the battle against plastic waste. According to campaigners, humans produce over 300 million tons of plastic every year, 50% of which is for products only used once. But refilling and reusing your own bottle or container could be a solution to prevent plastic pollution. UK supermarket Waitrose has started a trial to encourage customers to buy and refill produce like rice and cereals. And one of the world's biggest hotel groups, Intercontinental, has announced it will cut its 200 million mini soap and shampoo bottles by 2021, switching to refills to reduce plastic waste. So can the refill culture take off? And can we change our behaviour towards plastics?
Let us start the conversation. With me at the round table, we have Natalie Fee, environmental campaigner and founder of City to Sea. We'll find out what that is. We welcome once again Professor Karl from the Centre for Waste Management at the University of Central Lancashire, and returning also Dr. Sharon, an expert on environmental sustainability at Keele University. All experts in your field, but also all human beings. So let me ask each one of you, when did you last go a day without plastic?
Oh, probably in plastic-free July would have been when I had a proper plastic-free day. I have a teenage son, so it's a lot harder for me to be completely plastic-free. So I aspire to live with less plastic rather than to be plastic-free.
How do you go about it? Because even your toothpaste is normally in a plastic tube.
Mine's not in a plastic tube. No, I have toothy tabs. So my toothpaste comes in tab form. You can buy them online. I get mine from Lush. And I've got a bamboo toothbrush, so mine don't come in, well...
If you could do it in July, why don't you do it every day?
Oh, well, I do that every day.
No, I mean, go without plastic. I'm trying to establish how difficult it is.
No, it's a really good question because, you know, I think when I've reduced plastic a huge amount in my life, but there are some days when I'm really, really busy. Like, for example, the other day I came home, I ordered a takeaway. I was tired. My son was starving. I'd been at work all day. Ordered a takeaway. Put no plastic, please, in the little box. Of course, it comes in a plastic bag, and there were plastic lids on it. So there are days when I have a plastic fail.
The only thing I can disagree with you there is that your son was probably not starving. He was just a very hungry teenage
yes,
boy. What about you,
corrected.
Sharon? We'll come to you in a minute, Karl. Any days without?
I don't think there are, because, you know, from the minute you get up in the morning, all the electronics around you are made of plastic. When I use my credit card, that's made of plastic. The clothes that I'm wearing are often made of plastics. So the shoes that I'm wearing are made of plastic.
So we're fighting a losing battle here?
I think we've become, in a very short space of time, we've become completely addicted to plastic. And it's not easy to step back from that. But there are plastics we can avoid. There are. So we do need to do more to stop using this plastic.
But we're going to end at that point where the world is just a rubbish dump a little bit later if we avoid some plastics. We're still going to get there, aren't we?
But it might buy us time to find alternatives. We do, at the end of the day, we need to find things. If something's not going to last 400, 500 years in use, then we should be making it out of something that degrades faster. So part of the solution is to find materials that don't stick around for centuries.
So take a bottle with you or take a canister to the supermarket, top it up with your rice, top it up with your water if it happens to be a water bottle. Basically, that would solve the problems, wouldn't it?
It'll go a long way to solve the problems, because a lot of the things that we use in packaging, say, you know, the bag that your rice comes in, that is going to stick around for an awfully long time. When you think of the time we use it, is a fraction of how long that's going to last in the environment.
OK, I'm not going to ask you the question. You can tell me if you want to, Karl. But what I want to ask is we've already talked about alternatives. Are we getting closer to finding something that could be used instead of?
I think we have to embrace plastics, and rather than look for something instead of, we have to look at the types of plastic we use and how we actually manage the use of those plastics. So if we can refill plastic containers, then we should look at that. So our whole society relies so heavily on plastics, it's impossible to put the genie back in the box. Because if you look at our furnishings in our house, our carpets, our furniture, our cars, everything's got plastic in it. It's really difficult to say we're going to remove all that and use something else.
But then we're stuck with it, aren't we? This is the point. We just got to be more sensible about it, Natalie.
Yeah, and I think what Sharon was saying,
Reuse, refill.
We come into contact with plastic, hundreds of times a day, but it's the single-use plastic that we really are trying to target, especially through our campaigns at City to Sea. It's really about what plastic, the single-use disposable plastic, can we actually eliminate from our lives by carrying a reusable bottle, carrying a reusable coffee cup, taking our lunchbox to work, refilling it when we go out for lunch. There's simple things that we can all implement throughout our day, which actually, when you add them up, make a huge difference, and especially when you start timesing that by the population and around the world.
Is there any evidence, you reckon, so far? I mean, we're becoming more morally conscious, it seems to be, because it's always on the TV, it's always in the newspapers, children talk about it. Is there any evidence that it's actually doing any good?
It's changing those habits. So, it's not that long ago we didn't have recycling bins. And now, if you've got a plastic bottle in your hand and you want to dispose of it, you'll actively go and look for a bin. And that hasn't taken that long to get that into people's behaviour. But we need to kind of substitute those materials so we can stop using things like, we go for a takeaway coffee or go to one of the fast food chains and they'll hand you a drink and they don't ask, they just put the lid on. I'm going to drink that in my car. I don't need a plastic lid on, but I don't get the choice, don't get asked. And it's kind of those small changes that can make a massive difference if everybody did it.
Reuse, refill, that is the theme of this programme. Waste management expert, Professor in. I mean, we don't come much better than that. So when I put stuff into my recycling bin and it was it was falling out of it this week, it's only collected once every 2 weeks, but we put a lot of stuff into there. How sure can I be that it is going to be reused? Recycled, whatever you want.
The problem is that if you put it into your recycling bin, that means it's going to be recycled. So it's going to go through a process and be made into something else. What we're trying to do is trying to get people to reuse their containers, because that saves having to buy
I get that,
plastic.
but I'm asking you, as a professor in waste management, how sure can I be that what I'm doing is going to end up seeing that material recycled? That's a really difficult and leading question. It depends on where you live. It depends on the contract that your local authority has. It depends on which company that plastic is going to go to, whether it's going to be recycled within the UK. So you can't be sure, can you?
So you cannot be sure, no. And I think that's the biggest challenge for the general public, because you get the local papers which will emphasise the fact that you don't know what's going to happen to your recycling, and therefore it disengages people in the process, which is bad, because just because currently it's not being recycled doesn't mean that later on it won't be recycled.
Yes, of course, but once you've been put off,
once you've been put off, it's very hard to re-engage.
With City to Sea, what are you trying to get people to do, really?
We're encouraging people to reduce the amount of plastic we use for exactly that reason, as you don't know what's really happening at the moment with your recycling. A lot of it's being exported to Asia, to Turkey, where we see huge amounts of plastic just piling up.
So there's no
burnt.
point, really, is there?
Well, that's I think the problem is that it can just put people off recycling. I think the recycling system currently in this country is broken, and if we were to see something like a deposit scheme introduced, whereby people get money back when they take their bottles back to the store, we've seen in other countries that reduces litter from plastic bottles by about 95%. So you really don't see plastic bottle tops and plastic bottles littering the hedgerows and the riverbanks and the beaches in those countries.
So you think, reuse this refill, if you had a deposit on a plastic bottle as well as on the glass ones, which glass makes sense to me, but the plastic ones as well, do you think that would encourage reuse, refill?
It would certainly encourage recycling. And ultimately, we want to get people off of single-use plastics and focus on reusing. So that's what we're actually focusing on through our refill campaign. So we started that in 2015, and we got people noticing putting stickers up in shops and cafes that have got taps, because we're surrounded by taps with good quality drinking water wherever we are. And we just thought, let's open up those taps to the public and get people feeling comfortable about going in and taking their bottle in and asking for a free refill.
Wow. I mean, I don't know whether you know how many people go in to use that sort of thing, but how many stores have taken up
we've
your
got now
offer of the stickers?
In the UK, over 20,000 refill stations in the UK. So we work with all the major chains pretty much in the UK, as well as independent shops and cafes. And we've got an app as well, so people can see where their nearest refill is on the app, and they can even add refill stations to the app as well. So if you're living in a village or community or town.
We are seeing towns embracing this. So you're seeing that plastic-free towns badging themselves as this, and companies and businesses are embracing that as
Sorry. How can you be a plastic-free town?
So
it's like near where I live, Chipping Norton wanted to be a Brexit-free zone. Well, or somebody was asking you to sign up. I mean, it's just not possible, is it?
Well, it's not possible, I think, to go completely plastic-free, but you can have that aspiration to cut down as much single-use plastic as possible. So these towns kind of, sign up to a collective will to support that movement. So just as you said, we're seeing, shops advertising the fact, yes, bring your refill container in here, we'll accept refill containers, and just trying to get away from packaging. And we're seeing now plastic-free shops taking off. And
so
that's
I could go in with my container and dip it into the rice sack?
Yeah, they tend to have dispensers, because that's been one of the objections, is that how do you maintain hygiene? So if everybody's dipping the containers in, there's obviously a problem there. So these places are designed so you can go and weigh your container.
We are going back to sort of open all hours days, aren't we? Where you go in and somebody with a nice scoop would actually fill up your container for you.
Yeah.
Anything else, Mr. Foster?
But we're going back, because if you're old enough, you'll remember that in the 80s and 90s, they had a number of shops that would offer open bins of rice and pulses, and you would take your own containers there and you wouldn't get any packaging. But they didn't, they were at the wrong time. Yeah. And a lot of them closed down, or they've all gone now, apart from Newton's, because people didn't engage with it. So it's whether the time is right for people to start engaging, because it's about getting the general public to engage, not just the converted. So a lot of these first uptake of refill shops will be people who are well aware of the issues around plastic and want to engage. But what you really want is everybody doing that.
And is it taking off? If it died in the 80s and 90s because people thought it was a bit hippy-dippy.
Well, there was no focus then in the 80s and 90s around plastic or the environment, so it was at the wrong time.
We're seeing huge demand for it now. So we've had over 250,000 people download the Refill app, and we're expanding that to be refill more, so not just water, so people can look on it and see where they can go to refill their laundry liquid, and go to supermarkets like we've just seen in Oxford. So Waitrose have trialled this unpackaged section, and that was a huge success.
And all of this is for free, is it? I mean, none of these people are charging for the refills.
What do you mean in terms of, obviously...
I mean, the water would be free.
No, that's for free, sorry, yes.
But
obviously
there
if
are
you're
other places
buying
that
your
have
household goods, that is going to be a charge.
You couldn't tell me where to fill up my car for free.
Yeah, exactly. But the demand for this is huge, like the amount of zero-waste shops now popping up across the country, and then supermarkets now are starting to bring it back. And even the big companies like Unilever, they're now trialling refill and reuse in some of their products. So the demand for this is there, very much so, and it's a business opportunity for
Karl's
people as well.
absolutely right, though, isn't it? You know, it has to be something that catches on, and it has to catch on with the big companies, because without it, they would fail commercially. In other words, they're fulfilling a need, a desire that is out there. They wouldn't be doing this for the good of the planet. They're just doing it for the good of themselves, mostly, wouldn't you think?
They are, and they've got an economic reason to do it as well, because it cuts down on their transportation costs. So if you take one of the examples, coffee comes in jars. Glass jars are very heavy, but you can buy refill packets. So in terms of producing a number of glass jars. You don't have to produce that many. You just buy it once, and then you buy your refill packet and refill your coffee. It saves
But the last
transportation.
refill pack, just a second, the last refill packet I bought was plastic.
Yeah, so that is the downside to it, is that it's made of plastic. But on the plus side, it's saving greenhouse gas emissions because you're not transporting so much packaging around.
Which is a bigger problem, do you think? Plastic waste or food waste?
I think the two things are massive problems in their own right, and the two things aren't unrelated, because if you got rid of all food packaging, then food waste is going to become more of a thing.
This is exactly where I was going, because I was reading this morning that if you wrap a cucumber in plastic, it lasts for 2 weeks. If you don't wrap it in plastic, it lasts 3 days. So if you save by not having the plastic, you're throwing away food. The position I'm trying to take here and get you to answer upon is you know, you do one thing well, and there's another problem.
Well, you're trying to get society to change. So if you want to go unpackaged vegetables and other products, then you're looking at people not buying in bulk and buying every day as we used to, when people would go to the greengrocer and just buy for 1 or 2 days rather than do a week shopping or longer. And that's the challenge.
Yeah, because this is part of the problem, is that we've become, this is where I'm saying we've become addicted to the plastic, not just through the material itself, but what that plastic brings with it. So like right now, you know, we live in the UK, yet you know, for Christmas, we can go in the middle of winter, we can buy strawberries. That shouldn't be a thing in the UK.
It might not be after Brexit.
well, no. But that's made possible through packaging, and not just the packaging that you see, the packaging in the supply chain. So part of, if we really want to get rid and really want to make a big impact on this, it's going to mean a change in substituting out buying in bulk, so not expecting the glass jar or the refill package, but going with your own container and going in to fill your own container so it's transported in bulk. That cuts down on the carbon. But to change our expectations on what we buy and when we buy it, and buy more local, and that's more sustainable, because you're then supporting local livelihoods, and that becomes, you know, a more sustainable lifestyle, you know, through and through.
I was quite interested in something you said before the programme, which is that plastic wouldn't be quite so bad if we could get rid of some of the nasty stuff within it, and then it would be more easy to recycle. Is it that easy that people could do that? Give us an example of where unnecessary chemicals are used.
So there's quite a lot of flame retardant products in things you buy. And within the EU, there's not the same level of flame retardants in electrical goods as there are in the UK, because we have these rules that you have to put these flame retardants in. And there's been a lot of debate around how effective they are and the emissions that they produce. One of the issues about recycling plastics that have these toxic materials in is you can't then mix them with other plastics that haven't got that in, because all you're doing is dispersing these toxins back into the recycling.
So are you saying there will always be some plastics that cannot be recycled? Or
No,
or
well,
you
they're
saying
saying
you could change
you could
the
change
rules,
you could change the composition
but then
and
the
change
sofa
the
might
rules.
catch fire.
But talking with flame experts at the university, it doesn't give you that extra peak, because in Europe they don't have them in them. So, and they've got less deaths from sofas catching fire than we have in the UK.
Okay, a different topic for a different day.
Yeah, I think it's interesting with the, you know, just for me, it's always about bringing it back to single use, you know, and the fact that we think it's still acceptable to use a stirrer for 4 seconds, a plastic stirrer that's going to last for 400 years. So it's really about doing an overhaul and for the government to take stronger action on bringing in bans. So one of the things we worked on a few years ago was the cotton bud or the Q-tip. I go like that, you're not supposed to put them in your ears, apparently. But we ran...
If you did, they wouldn't be reusable.
They're not. You can get reusable ones. We ran a petition lobbying supermarkets to stop making cotton buds out of plastic, because they're being flushed down the loo in their millions and making their way into the rivers and seas. So obviously they shouldn't be flushed.
Bamboo, perhaps, or something
Well,
like that?
they've now switched to paper and card. So we ran the campaign called Switch the Stick. We got all the 9 major supermarkets to start making them out of paper and card instead. So if they are flushed, they're not going to cause any problem for wildlife, and they're going to naturally biodegrade. But I think now the government are bringing in a ban for that. But
they're banning it.
They're banning it as of 2020.
You mean the original ones?
Plastic cotton buds.
Okay.
Yeah.
Now let's talk about biodegradation.
Yeah.
Biodegrading, it's a lot easier. If you put a paper bag, leave it out in the rain, it'll biodegrade pretty quickly. But if you put it in landfill and it's got no oxygen,
then it will stay there.
It will stay there for as long as...
I think biodegradable plastics is muddying the water.
Yeah.
Because, one, you can't recycle them in the existing recycling system because it's for non-biodegradable plastics to be recycled, so it messes up the system and contaminates it. When they say they're biodegradable, it means we're in a professional composting technology, such as in-vessel composting. It doesn't necessarily biodegrade in your garden. It encourages people to litter because they say it's biodegradable, but it doesn't.
So how do we tell the con artists from the real seers, if you like? How do I know that what you say is going to help me with my lifestyle and help the planet? How do I spot the con men?
Well, I think generally anyone who's promoting reuse and refilling and is actually saying avoid single use and avoid disposables regardless of the material, because ultimately it's still a resource issue and we live on a finite planet, so we can't all be consuming throwaway things. We have to shift at some point towards reusables across the board. So I think that's where you can kind of sort out the wheat from the chaff. Home compostable, I think, is a bit different to sort of what is called bioplastics or compostable plastics. There is a logo for home compostable, and I have tried those in my home compost, and I have tried just burying them in the soil, and they do actually break down. So that could solve the cucumber issue, for example. I want to see plastics that aren't made of fossil fuels, because we need to keep fossil fuels in the ground to prevent runaway climate change. But we do need to be really careful that we don't just start making these bioplastics out of GM crops and invasive species.
But the argument to stop taking fossil fuel out of the ground is that you should look at reusing the plastics in the first place and recycling the plastics and keep them in the loop. Because one of the problems is it's not so much the plastic's fault, it's where the plastics end up, which is the problem. So they end up in landfill, they end up in our seas.
Agreed.
And that's the issue.
There's also an issue with, I see a lot of greenwash around sustainable plastics. So things that are sustainable, made from sustainable crops, so from bioethanol. And I want to see more done around that to ensure that those crops are grown sustainably and ethically. We hear a lot about rainforests being cut down to grow crops, and there's a lot of ethical issues as well around these crops.
We have to find alternatives. However much you want to be able to reuse something, it's not going to last forever and ever. And even if that little plastic bottle that you got last Wednesday is refilled 100 times, by the end of next year, it's probably going to have to be thrown away. So we've talked about dealing with stuff that eventually gets thrown away. What we haven't really talked about, and we don't have very much time, is what would there be in its place? You can't have a paper bottle, can you?
No, you can have a carton, but then you'll find that that's multi-layered and plastic lined to make it a long time.
So is anybody coming up with something to replace these things that we consider to be the public enemy number one?
Water fountains are one of the things that we're coming up with.
Good, yeah.
So we're seeing huge numbers of water fountains being reinstalled across the UK, which is great. We're working with sort of the train stations and airports, as well as business hubs and things to get water fountains installed. And I think really it's about setting the trend and normalising carrying a reusable bottle. And we're seeing it now, aren't we? It's becoming more of a trend, and then trend drives demand, and demand drives investment. So I think just being the champion, being seen with your reusable bottle.
I get it, but I'm still asking for examples of something that could perhaps be the alternative. Okay, we've got a water fountain, but for carrying stuff around.
I think it's very difficult because we have gone down this plastic avenue, and it is the best material for packaging. Putting aside water bottles, if you want to buy yogurts or other perishable goods, plastic is a good container for that.
There's a human health issue there as well that's being researched, that plastic...
We'll leave you two to argue after we've got 1 minute left. Sharon, your turn.
Ceramics and glass are great, if you use it lots and lots and lots and lots of times, because there's embedded carbon and they're made at high temperature.
This is just silica, it's sand, isn't it?
Well, yeah, but it would have been...
At the end of the day, it is part of the Earth.
I mean, that glass would have probably been melted at about 1400 degrees in a furnace. So that has carbon. And then the furnace is made of bricks that have been made at high temperature. So the embedded carbon in that's quite high. So what we must do is use, if we're going to... But that's great because we've got a material here that we value and we're going to use it lots of times. That's the opposite of single use.
Multi-use, and I can assure you these will not be binned.
Yep, good.
Immediately after the programme. They will be taken out, not by me, but they'll be taken out, washed, and reused, I hope.
And refilled from the tap.
If this programme continues, they will be reused 1,000 more times. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
It's always great to talk to people who have interesting ideas. Thank you for coming in. Great to see you in person. Thanks for coming back. Lovely to meet you. Thank you very much indeed. From me, David Foster, it's time to say goodbye. I hope to have your company next time. Ta-ra for now.